I've been doing Cold Approach for 23 and a half years, and during that period, one thing I've noticed is that game goes in cycles. There are periods where it definitely gets easier and periods where it definitely gets harder. And I would say that right now, Cold Approach is as easy as it has ever been. I want to share with you in this video why that's the case, how you can take advantage of it, and also why no matter how easy it ever gets, you will hear a lot of guys complaining that it's hard and getting harder. So let's get into all of that right now. So 23 years ago, when I started doing Cold Approach, it was very difficult, primarily because nobody was doing it. Because nobody was doing it, nobody was talking about it, nobody was teaching it, which meant there was very little information out there on how to get better. And what information did exist was oftentimes very, very flawed. I know in my first few years in game, I got many bad habits from taking information I thought was gospel that was actually fundamentally wrong. Yes, always there have been people that walk up and talk to each other at bars and different things like that to some extent, but formal Cold Approach fundamentally didn't really exist. And also online dating didn't really exist. So most people were still meeting through school or work or other social groups. That was the primary thing. And doing Cold Approach at that time was a little weird. Now, in a sense, the fact that it was weird was good because it stood out, right? If you go talk to a girl and had a good interaction, it was a truly remarkable experience for her, and that was good. However, on another level, girls were simply just not that used to meeting a stranger and hooking up. It wasn't really in their reality. And again, also the information we had was not very good. In my first year of learning game, I fundamentally believed, because this is what I read online from people I thought were authoritative, that there was no way to generate attraction. You walked up and it was either there or it wasn't, and you wanted to close as fast as possible before making a mistake, which violates so many principles of game. Right? Number one, attraction can be built. Number two, you need to spend time with the girl to build a decent interaction. Trying to rush to a number is not fundamentally good game. There was actually a period of time when the leading cutting-edge technology in game was hypnosis. Right? Then over time we learned about teasing and developing attraction. Then we learned about value and comfort, and et cetera, et cetera. It actually took a long time for the idea of instant dates and pulling to become prevalent in game. Even the guys who were the best at game in the early 2000s were primarily generating attraction, taking numbers and following up that way. And if you know anything about game, you know that numbers flake a lot and that doing your work in person is far more efficient. Let's fast forward to the 2010s. By this point, Cold Approach game had absolutely exploded, and there were tons of companies springing up teaching Cold Approach game all over the world. Some teaching it quite well, some teaching it quite badly. But it became much more in the sort of general consciousness of people and in the general consciousness of women, and women would get approached a lot. There are certain parks and venues where girls would go, and walking through the park, they would be approached multiple times. So during this period, women definitely started to get a little more awareness of the existence of Cold Approach and a little more of a defensiveness about it because they were being approached so much, oftentimes not particularly well, and oftentimes not very subtly. So this period would have arguably been one of the harder periods in which to do Cold Approach, although there were a lot more resources to learn Cold Approach. So you could in effect be much better at it and actually get worse results than you would have gotten had you been worse at it during an earlier time. Around about the same period, online dating started to really come into its own. Online dating had existed since the very beginning of this time. I know I had been doing online dating as early as the year 2000, but it became more and more common exponentially over time. And around the 2010s, it became one of the absolute most prevalent ways for people to meet. And so now, aside from Cold Approach, girls who didn't want to meet people through their social circle, or maybe girls who traveled, didn't have a social circle for whatever reason, they could meet guys through online dating, and they had less need for Cold Approach. However, online dating, while it temporarily was a negative for Cold Approach, in the long run, actually I would argue it's been a positive, and here's why. Before online dating became prevalent, hooking up with a stranger was a lot less common. And actually, the total amount of guys that girls were sleeping with was far lower. With the advent and popularization of online dating, the total amount of casual sex being had has gone through the roof compared to previous times, which makes girls far more okay with meeting a stranger, far more okay with going home with a stranger, far more okay with hooking up, and it makes their friends far less judgmental about all that, all of which is a net positive for Cold Approach. And another shift occurred recently in 2020 and 2021, which is we had a global pandemic. This meant that people were not interacting socially nearly as much. Even more of dating went online. Cold approach was not a viable option in a lot of ways for a period of time. And that actually meant that a lot of guys who were doing cold approach and were getting some results with it, or who were ramping up and getting better at it, stopped doing it, got rusty, kind of fell off. And so now we're at this period where more than ever people are hooking up, but the awareness and sort of like inoculation against cold approach is back to a fairly low level, so that doing cold approach is actually pretty unique now. Cold approach really does stand out, and girls don't have their defenses up against it like they would have in the period where like tons and tons of people were doing cold approach. On top of which, the amount of material about cold approach has continued to grow. I don't think it's grown quite as exponentially as it has in the early 2010s, just because not as much was known, but definitely there have been tons of new revelations and we've gotten far more efficient. So we're at a period now where the amount of knowledge is at a maximum, the amount of receptiveness and willingness to hook up is very, very high, and the social demographics are also attuned for it. So all of this is very, very positive. And one final factor that ties this all together is with online dating becoming so prevalent, I think a lot of women are becoming tired of online dating because they're tired of going on date after date with guys that don't have any game, that bore them. So when a guy comes along that actually is exciting, I think that's starting to stand out more than it would have in the past. So that's all theory, but I can also tell you from experience that when I'm taking guys out on boot camp these days, more of them are getting laid on the program than ever, and actually more of them are meeting girls they get into relationships with than ever before. Now, part of that obviously is I've been coaching for longer and I'm becoming a better and better coach. That obviously is a factor as well. However, even for guys that don't have as good a game when meeting the girls, at the time when they meet that girl, i.e. they meet them earlier in the program or they came in less good to begin with, for the amount good they are at game, they are getting better results than they have in the past. So why is it, if cold approach is actually getting easier, that people still complain that cold approach is hard, and some people even are still complaining that cold approach is getting harder? Well, there are a couple reasons. Number one, I did say easier. I didn't say it's the easiest thing in the world. There is still work that has to be done. You still do need to go up and approach a girl. You still do need to get over some of your fear, and you still do need to learn some technique. It's not like you just snap your fingers and you're good the first second you do it, right? It's easy enough to get good at relatively fast, but it's not so easy you're just going to be good instantly, or you're just going to be good without doing any work. So I didn't say it's easy, I just said it's significantly easier, and it is very doable. In terms of why guys would say that it's gotten harder, first of all, let's take a little bit of perspective. The guys who are saying it's gotten harder have not been doing it for 24 years. They've probably been doing it for a year or two or three, something like that, maybe 6 months. And when these type of guys are saying it's getting harder, what they mean is their own personal journey has gotten harder. And here's why. When you first start out in game, every little bit of success feels like a revelation. It feels like an epiphany, and your eyes are full of stars and wonder. Then you get to a certain point where, while you do continue to improve, the results of that improvement temporarily plateau out, right? You're not making these tremendous epiphanies all the time. And so you feel as though your rate of change is plateauing. Also, you've gotten used to a certain level of success. Whereas when you first started doing game, a phone number was incredible and you couldn't believe it and you were so happy about it. Now you're like, another phone number, it'll probably flake. Right? And so your ego and your expectation have grown at a rate faster than your results. So even though the results are still improving, it's much more frustrating. And this is actually a period where a lot of guys drop off. And I would encourage you not to. I would encourage you to be very objective about your results and compare yourself based on results to your past. You will be making measurable progress, but it won't be as fast as it once was. The good news is if you get through this phase, it will actually get faster again once you get to that intermediate advanced phase. Because now, as you're making small incremental progress, most of your approaches were close to being successes anyway, and that incremental progress will once again translate to results. But you have to get through that inflection point, and that's where a lot of guys think game is tough, and that's where a lot of guys sadly quit game. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the reasons why cold approach is easier than it ever has been. Beyond which, it is also the absolute best way to learn game for all types of game. Even if you're going to do online game, you still have to get on dates with girls and you still have to be attractive on those dates. Even if you're going to do game primarily in social circle, you still need to know how to attract someone, and cold approach is the best way and always will be the best way to learn those skills, in addition to being easier than ever right now.